Good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Café New Canadians, your event virtual series where we bring you information of importance to newcomers in Canada, information of employment and other related matters. Café New Canadians is brought to you by New Canadians TV, your web and TV series where we also bring you information about settlement, employment, small businesses, among others. You can watch us on Omni Television and on YouTube, and of course on our website and newcanadians.tv and youtube.com/newcanadians. Now, today we are discussing a topic. Today, our topic is Canadian immigration process amid the new normal. My name is Gertrude Tumusime, and I am very, very glad to host Veronica Wilson, a Canadian immigration lawyer and the founder of Roots Immigration Law. You're welcome to the show, Veronica.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be back again.
Yeah, you're welcome. Today, you all know that COVID-19 changed the way things run in every arena, in every sphere. So one of the areas that are really affected is the immigration field. And we had, when COVID just kind of started in March or somewhere in around the beginning of April, we hosted Veronica Wilson on this show, and she shared what was going on then. But even since then, 4 months later or even 5, a lot has happened. And so we would like to hear back from Veronica. But first, I would like to welcome everyone joining, people in Toronto and beyond. I know that we have people joining from Argentina, some are joining from Chile. You're all welcome. And remember to send in your questions in the Q&A tab if you're attending from Zoom, and on YouTube, you can write your questions in the comment section. And Veronica will be glad to take those questions during this webinar. Well, Veronica, how are you doing? How has everything been since COVID, since the last time we talked?
It's been a little crazy, to be honest, but things are changing constantly. And actually, the government of Canada has been pretty accommodating. There's been the amount of new program delivery instructions and new advice and clarifications that they've provided have been really helpful. So yeah, back in March, the borders closed. It was March 18th, I believe. So that kind of put everything on pause. And then slowly things have been coming out of what do we do? What about people in this situation? What about people in this situation? And the government's been operating on a limited capacity as well. So they are working from home and trying to access their own databases while balancing how to keep immigration moving. And now in September, we have seen a lot of changes, but overall, the big picture remains the same, and that COVID is still very much something that is a safety concern. So the borders continue to be closed, except for some specific exemptions and travel exemptions. So there hasn't been too much flexibility on the travel exemptions, but within the specific immigration application programs, they have been making accommodations to try to help those who might be stuck either like in limbo or outside of Canada fit within the travel exemptions and come. So like, for example, something that they have done, which has been great, is the restoration period has been extended. So typically someone on a visitor visa, work permit, study permit, once their work permit expires, they would have 90 days to either leave the country or apply for an extension or something new. So that 90-day period has now been extended till December 31st. So no one is required to leave. They're protecting people that are currently within Canada. So that was something that was really nice to know and has put a lot of people at ease.
So for the restoration period extended that you've been talking about, So if, for example, somebody is a visitor here and they had 90 days for restoration, so now they have until December. During that time, can they can they get a work permit? Can they work?
No, so the restoration is just someone who may have lost their status. So if
Yeah.
someone has a visitor visa, they can apply within Canada to extend that visitor status. So that's something that may not necessarily have been lost. It's usually occurs when someone perhaps applied for something and then that application got refused and then they are now out of status. So say I had a work permit and then I applied for a new work permit. The period between the first work permit expiring and then getting the new work permit, you are allowed to work on something called implied status. When a decision has been made on that new work permit, however, if that was a refusal, at that point, they would be out of status and then the 90 days would kick in. So this 90 days has been extended to the end of December. So someone would now be able to figure out what their next step is and it wouldn't be limited within that strict time period. So that's some flexibility that's been implemented.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the last time we had a chat, and that was, I think, the beginning of April, we were talking more about the travel restrictions because that was the thing that was really happening at that time. And you have mentioned that that hasn't changed much. People are still not coming in except for certain groups of people. So I would like you to help us understand who can come in, as of today, who can come in and who cannot come in, and where is the travel restriction binding some people and not others?
Yes, so in terms of visitors, that's still restricting anyone that wants to come just as a visitor for tourism. They have to have some non-optional, non-discretionary purpose. So perhaps some like urgent need to come to Canada and meet one of the travel exemptions. So there really isn't anything for visitors at all. There are family members of permanent residents or Canadian citizens that may come, but even if they came just as, like, they couldn't come just as a visitor, they would have to have some reason. Perhaps their family member is ill and they need to come, like as some example. In terms of study permits, students and workers who had study permits, who had their study permit approved before March 18th, they are allowed to enter Canada. So that has not changed. So people who now have a new study permit cannot enter Canada except for, so they've released just 3 days ago, more instructions and more guidance on how to fit some of these students within this travel exemption. So currently it just reads, if your study permit was not issued before March 18th, then you don't meet the exemption, but they have released things that can say, if, for example, your part of your study is required to be in Canada, maybe there's some workshop or some placement that you have to be within the country, then they could permit it, given all these other criteria that has to be met. So they're kind of having flexibility there. And also for family members of people who are here on a temporary status, they have special authorization that can be obtained from like the embassy or the visa office to allow them to come within, if there's some critical need to enter Canada. So it isn't quite like a blanket exemption anymore. There are other things that they may not have contemplated originally when they released these they're now kind of slowly releasing more guidance and clarifying a lot of things, which is great.
Okay, and how is it with the airlines? Because I know that yes.
Oh, I think I lost you. Perhaps the.
About that, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
So I was asking that how is it with the airlines? How are they operating? Because, well, it's not so many people traveling, but still some people are coming in. What are kind of the guidelines with the airlines? And Can you share about
Yes, actually, this is something that's become a bit more of an issue as more people have been permitted to travel. They have to show, like, the onus is on them to show that they meet the travel exemption and that it is not a like an optional purpose for them coming. So then the first point of contact are these airlines staff who have not really received the proper training in interpreting this. So we've seen that airlines have been refusing people entry, and that is not something that is okay. And we're trying to look into this to see if there is perhaps a way to avoid this, because it should be done once they do enter Canada, or they should put something into place where there is a Canada Border Service agency on staff or available to make these assessments. But something about, like, as a lawyer, providing a package that shows how they meet the requirements of the exemption, showing like documents of how it's not optional, and also explaining like the quarantine plan for the mandatory isolation. So this is something that it's not necessary to have it in writing, but I find it's really helpful to have it all laid out. They want to know the place that you're going to be staying, the phone number where you're staying, and explaining how you will not be taking public transportation, going straight to your accommodations, and how you'll be like getting food and the other necessities without leaving. So unfortunately, a lot of this is being determined at the airline level, which has presented some problems. But if you are prepared, don't go expecting the person working for the airline to know the law in Canada. So it's best to kind of present this argument and everything that you need right when you're about to board, to avoid any problems.
Thank you, Veronica, for sharing about that. Are there any updates on the Canada-US border, like the restriction between the Canada-US border travel?
Not necessarily. They do review every month the restrictions. Right now, everything's in place to the end of September, so there doesn't really seem to be any changes. But it's really hard to predict what might be in the pipeline, because as everyone's kind of aware, this is something that's very new. They are starting to introduce schools opening up, and some offices are returning. So there could be something where they may open things up a little bit more, but nothing has been announced. And we'll have to wait until September 30th to see if there will be any changes regarding that. But there are some things that for people in the US or US citizens that may make things a little bit easier. Like, for example, work permits that are being processed, they can apply at the border instead of having to wait for a visa office that may be experiencing staff shortages to make a decision. So there's some people who don't require visas, and US citizens who can make some applications at the border. So there's some benefits to that. And people may have been, if they're able to, go to the US first and then cross to Canada, but the US has their own guidelines as well. So it's all kind of complicated. So I wouldn't recommend doing any international travel without speaking to professional first, to make sure that you're not going to be stuck or denied entry or denied boarding.
Yeah. And in terms of international travel, do we see, because we know that a lot has already changed, but do we see any changes beyond this, or is there any hope? In your perspective as an immigration lawyer, is there any kind of hope that things might be getting better? Maybe they'll open the airport to people coming from outside Canada to come in, you know.
Yeah, I've been monitoring the different airports, and they kind of found that Twitter seems to be a good source for figuring out which airlines are closed, which airlines are open. So right now, the way the travel restrictions are working for people who are submitting permanent resident applications, if you're outside of Canada and your permanent resident application was approved after March 18th, there's currently no exemption for you. There's no way for you to enter Canada. So this is something that is impacting a lot of people right now. There's only the temporary ways for like critical workers and things like that. So the tiny bit of hope that I have found encouraging is that one of the pathways for permanent residents is through this online skilled worker stream called Express Entry. And to enter Express Entry, there's different categories that you have to be eligible for. One is Canadian experience class, and those are people that have experience within Canada and are most likely still in Canada. So the Express Entry, to submit your application for permanent residence, you have to wait until you receive an invitation. So after COVID happened, the government was kind of limiting the invitations that they would give to a specific program, when prior to that, it was kind of open to all the different programs. So they were restricting it to the Canadian experience, and then also one provincial nomination programs, which usually rely on someone having a job offer and most likely within Canada. So the little bit of hope was in July, they are now opening up the Express Entry and giving invitations to apply for permanent residence to people under the federal skilled worker program. So this means they most likely they qualify because they have work experience outside of Canada, and it's kind of designed for those people that are currently outside of Canada. So my thinking is that if they are now opening this up and inviting people to apply for permanent residence, and the processing time should be within 6 months, then once these people who are successful and they get an approved permanent resident, if the current state of the travel exemption that's in place says they can't come because they got PR after March 18th, then why would they be giving these invitations for a permanent resident program that sort of is under the understanding that they're outside of Canada? I don't know if that made sense, but there's a little bit of hope, because they are now inviting people who are outside of Canada to apply for permanent residence when that had previously been unavailable. So my thinking is, if they're doing that, then they are going to be needing to open the border up to allow them to enter Canada once these applications are approved.
6 months from now?
Yeah, well, 6 months was the pre-COVID processing time. So processing times for applications are a completely different story. They are just kind of saying that anything that's listed online is not accurate. So it's hard to say when things will be approved. I know that they're prioritizing certain things, so you can kind of within your application apply. Mention that it is urgent, like put in a request for urgent processing. I've done this for like nurses or other healthcare workers. So, oh, I think you may have froze. Can you still hear me?
Froze. Can you see me now?
Yes,
Can you
all
see
good now.
Sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So you were mentioning about certain people who are like the nurses, like the health workers. Are there other certain groups, like different groups of workers who are coming in on permanent residence as a way kind of exempted from the other like programs that, for example, federal skilled worker, if you didn't get your permanent residence before March 18th, you can't come in. But I know that some programs are allowed to actually come in. So can you, apart from the nurses and the frontline workers, who are some of those other ones?
So the nurses and frontline workers, if they have permanent residence, they still can't come in. So nobody who has permanent residence can come in right now. It's only on work permits, or there's people who can work without a work permit. There's some authorization that can be granted for that. So those are the type of things in terms of processing times. I'm thinking for temporary applications, because work permits are still very much active, but the speed at which they get processed, I know that some are being prioritized over others, and those are showing that it's not necessarily limited, but if you can explain why you have an urgent need, why your employer requires you to be physically present, you can't work remotely, there's arguments to be made. So with work permit applications too, you have to show that it's not optional to work outside of Canada. It has to be done within. So a lot of that can just be showing that your employer is still operating, because a lot, I've worked with some companies who have now gone, had to lay off their employees because of closures and not able to continue their operations because of the COVID restrictions. So that's another story as well. There's been so many people impacted, but we're finding ways to help, finding different creative solutions, and the government of Canada has been receptive and flexible, at least with maintaining status for those within Canada, like the restoration I mentioned earlier, or trying to look for other options. They, for example, there's an application if you have a work permit and your employer is named on this work permit and recently got laid off. If you want to get another work permit with another employer, before you could start working, you would need that new work permit. But now they've introduced that as soon as you make that new application on this employer-specific work permit, which would require either a labor market impact assessment or be exempt from one of those. So they are now saying that as soon as you apply for it, even before you get the work permit, you can start working. So this is something that is really great. That
there's a lot of accommodation, I can tell.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to keep up with, and I keep learning more every day, but I have a great network of other immigration lawyers and representatives, and we kind of share what's been going on. Actually, today they announced something that is just also like very great about translations, like having to have a certified translation of something. They were requiring you to have like a certified true copy. So they just, I didn't read through it all, but the gist of it was that they're going to be more accommodating in terms of translations and not requiring a copy of the true document. So before, because a lot of the translation services and people who would be translating abroad, the certified translators are unable to do it anymore because you have to bring your original documents. So I have like, I think pay stubs like coming from Iran that I'm waiting for so that I can certify them and then provide, but now they're sort of eliminating that. And that was just announced today. I have to read through exactly what all the criteria is, but it's been great. So if you think that maybe you're kind of stuck in a situation, like there may be a way around it, or there might be something that you're not aware of yet that the government's been announcing to help.
Yeah. So let's talk about international students. We know that international students, they are those that are outside of Canada and they apply to school, got admitted, and they want to come to school. So are they able to?
Yes and no. There's still the restriction in place that unless you got the study permit before March 18th, that you're not able to enter Canada. But they just released some more guidelines in terms of like distance learning, like online courses, and because like it's not so much as coming to Canada, but some people are worried about after they graduate, are they still going to be eligible to get their postgraduate work permit, which a lot of people rely on as a pathway to permanent residence. So previously, before COVID, if you had done a program and more than half was online studies, you would not be eligible for this postgraduate work permit anymore. So they've announced that there's going to be some flexibility with that. In terms of still allowing you to be eligible after. So they've laid out like different scenarios and different criteria depending on the length of your program and different stages of entering Canada. They have, I don't to know it offhand, but they have now introduced like some guidance for students, which is great because it is September and a lot of people are wondering. So I think they are being accommodating. And I think a lot of it will depend on the school or the university, college, whatever. Like, are they even operating? Do they even have classes? Does the program require you to come to Canada to take part? Maybe there's something that can't be completed online. And if that's something that's specific to your school or your program and you can show that, then there may be a way to enter Canada then. And then at that point, you have to show that you meet that exemption. You have to show that you have your quarantine plan and that it's not mandatory, and hope that, hope that not, it is mandatory, and hope that the airline is up
Allows
to date.
you?
Yeah. So I don't know. Everyone should stay home.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard.
So I understand that it's going to be a lot of online learning for many students, international students right now. And then so those who will still stay outside of Canada, and when the time comes for them to come in, when even they have done the 50% of their time, they're hoping that COVID gets better, obviously, and they can be allowed in, what do you think is going to be, do you think it's going to be kind of an easy road for them, as much as it would have been if they were here, to kind of apply for their permanent residence?
I hope so. I'm hoping that the economy will strengthen by then, but I have a lot of clients now who need to get Canadian work experience. They have graduated, they have their postgrad work permit, or they're authorized to study, but they can't find employment, or they had employment and then lost it. So that's been a struggle. So it would be great if there was something extended that way. Like, maybe you had work experience, but due to COVID, you weren't able to complete it. Maybe you can get your work permit extended. I'm not sure. But I hope that as things slowly open up, that there will be more availability to get the work experience they need, so that they can stay in Canada. It's a very common pathway, the international students and then Canadian work experience. So thankfully, they are allowed to stay in Canada now. And I have heard from a couple people that they have been finding jobs as things open up. So that's good.
Okay. Just a reminder for everyone attending to send in your questions so that Veronica can answer the questions. We're going to be taking the questions that are already here, but if you're attending on Zoom, just type your questions in the Q&A tab. And if you're on YouTube, in the comment section, and Veronica will be glad to take those questions. Okay, so Veronica, can we talk about the processing time of these different programs and the different applications that people are putting in for immigrating to Canada? I know you mentioned earlier, obviously, it was like 6 months for example, Federal Skilled Worker Program or Express Entry, and things changed because there's not enough manpower to do, all these things. And so do you think it's getting better? And if it is getting better, do we think that things are going to like because you mentioned that they are starting to give more people invitations to apply, and that is a good sign, right? So
yeah.
in terms of processing time, do you think it's getting any better than it was the last time we spoke, or
It's hard to say. I have to believe that it would be getting better, because I know that they are just, the visa offices are reopening, and that people who are working from home are now going back into their offices as well. So having more staff working for the government can adjudicate them faster. But in terms of Express Entry, I haven't had any approved yet since COVID happened. Sponsorships I have. So that's something that for couples that are within Canada and submitted the in Canada sponsorship application, previously before COVID, you would have to go for a landing interview either upon entry to Canada or at one of the one of the offices, but now they are providing, I've heard like through email, just getting an email saying you're a permanent resident or having a phone call. So I've had some of those happening, which is great. And then just I've had a study permit extension that was like really fast in like 4 days. So that was like unheard of.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was someone that was in Canada and wanted to extend. And then as well as work permits for people that we can show it's essential, then those have been processed. But it's kind of funny, like looking online at the processing times, you can look and you can choose which program. And one of the programs that's currently like being impacted is the International Experience Canada. So this is like the working holiday work permits. So right now that entire program is on pause. So I have somebody who submitted the work permit and it hasn't, I think it was actually March 18th. It was like the day the borders closed, and typically is a US citizen and it would take a couple of weeks. Sometimes I've had 2 days, like just really fast. And that's been since March. And I looked at the processing time a couple days ago and it says 58 weeks for this like one simple working holiday. So I think that is definitely not being prioritized. But actually another thing, whether or not the processing of an application is continuing is kind of irrelevant, because biometrics are something that's stalling a lot. So biometrics is something, it was only introduced in, I think it was July 2018. It wasn't even that long ago. And all it is the requirement to have like a photo and fingerprint. So it's just another element of security and screening that permanent resident applications and temporary applications require. There's some stipulation on who needs them, who doesn't need them. But when COVID first happened, there was no way to get your biometrics done. Yes. So within Canada, you would go to like the Service Canada offices, but those all closed. So someone who needed a work permit or a study permit or anything, if they required biometrics, they couldn't get a decision at all. So it was just on hold. So they announced accommodations for that anyone applying within Canada for a temporary resident who would have previously required biometrics now just does not. So it was very exciting and we're very thankful. So that has been lifted.
That's just for people who are within, right?
And temporary. So the processing now for permanent resident, even within Canada, you still need your biometrics. And then, so someone this is why I haven't had the permanent resident, like the express entry, approved yet, because they're waiting for biometric centers to open. So we're kind of.
And how is that going? Do you see them like really opening up?
Okay, maybe if they did, but there's going to be a huge backlog. There's so many people waiting. So they're going to have to figure out some way to stage it, or else there's just going to be like a big line of people and defeating the whole purpose of keeping everyone safe. So I'm hoping that they're just going to do away with it completely, or maybe it's contingent, like if you say you get your permanent residence and after you apply for citizenship or apply for permanent resident like card renewal, maybe it has to be done then, or within 1 year you have to do it. Like I feel like they're going to need to have some sort of guidelines, because the amount of people that are waiting, it's a lot. So outside of Canada, they've now started to the biometric centers have been opening. So these are at the Canadian embassies. So now people like in Australia, they can get it. Ireland, they can get it at their local embassies. I had one that was open and then it closed again. So you have to see whether there's a second wave of COVID or not. So, but again, those ones, it's kind of ironic, because even if they can get the biometrics, they're outside of Canada. So if they get their permanent residence, they can't come yet because the restriction says after March 18th. So, and then if it's more for the temporary one. So all of this just kind of impacts the processing time, because it's not as simple as it was before. There's other criteria that has to be evaluated that takes time, and they're learning. The immigration officers are learning all these new requirements as we are.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Veronica. Let's take some questions from our attendees. Carla wants to know, is that true that Venezuelans with an expired passport can enter the country?
Yeah, so just in terms of the questions, something that's like very specific like that, I won't be able to speak to or know offhand. I'm not sure there, I know there has been accommodations with expired passports and COVID. I don't know the specific countries or around it, but again, it wouldn't just be that simple. They would have to meet the other requirements, whether they were coming as a worker, student, everything. Like there has to be some reason to come. But again, like anyone is welcome to send me an email if there is something that might be very specific or I don't know offhand. I'm happy to try to answer that for you offline.
Okay. Yeah, so can you, well, we can share the email with them maybe at the end of the session,
Sure.
and then they can get in touch with you if they really need more clarification. Okay. An anonymous attendee wants to know, do you think the government will allow for virtual exploration visits?
Yeah, so virtual exploration visits, this is for like business visitors or maybe startups or investors. Some requirements of one of these programs is that you come for exploratory visit first. Like you have to come to the province, come to the area before you open the business there. And if they aren't able to enter, how will they do that? So the virtual would be a great idea. I think this will depend on the individual government, and these usually are requirements of the provincial nominee program. So the different provinces may be working out something like that, because as the economy needs to grow, they're going to need to make accommodations like this. So maybe instead of the virtual, they would permit entry. There won't be an exemption. Like one of the things I could add is if you're going for an exploratory visit, can prove it's essential, then that could be a new exemption to entry. But yeah, I wish I knew.
Carla wants to know that at the moment, is the government giving work visas for applicants with a job offer?
So that's a very broad question. So there's all different types of ways that you can get a work permit, and just having a job offer is not necessarily one going to permit entry. So if your job offer meets other requirements, and so basically, if you have a job offer, there's two ways you can come. It's if you get a labor market impact assessment, or if you can fit within one of the exemptions of that. So there's different things like international trades, like through NAFTA or CETA in the US. Like you have to find the program that you fit into to get your work permit issued with the job offer. So you have to apply like any other way for the work permit. Once that's approved, then it comes down to is it essential and non-discretionary, and that's something that you're going to need to now put within the work permit application. So I'd be happy to chat about the specific job and see if there is a work permit pathway that allow you to enter Canada.
Okay. So Jennifer says, we've been invited to the PNP of Manitoba, and we are in the paper-based process. We received the invitation for pre-arrival services 1 month ago. Do you know if they are sending medical requests?
Okay, so again, a very program-specific question. So just for some clarification, the paper-based program means, or portion, so once they apply to a province and you get a nomination, the next stage is to apply for permanent residence. And typically the medical exams are provided within that second stage, or I'm not sure why they weren't in this case, but it could be some program that didn't require it up front for permanent residence. One thing I can say is those pre-arrival services emails, that they can pretty much be disregarded. It's something that's like auto-generated. That's been a problem before. It doesn't necessarily mean that your application is going to be approved. We've seen other lawyers who clients got that letter and then the application wasn't successful in the end. So I've just kind of, this is just my policy. I don't know if things have changed, but I just try not to think of that as an indication. It's just like an auto generated email. Pre-arrival services are now available. So that does tend to happen and may give some false hope. But again, I can see why there may be a delay in this specific case. But medical exams are open. Like that's not an issue that hasn't been closed. So if your application requires a medical exam, you can still definitely get that done.
Okay, thank you. Paper-based PNP, still that's a follow-up to the previous question. Is it possible to do upfront medical exam just to have it ready with the medical request? Does that work? Does it work that way?
If the program says that you will take the medical once it is requested, then I would stick to the guidance of that specific program. And the doctors will know as well. You have to go to specific IRCC designated panel physicians. So if you go and then you give your application number, they will say to you that this is something that you have to wait until it's requested. They should know. And then it could get messy if you do it and then they don't accept it and you have to do it again. And it's like a lot of, they do like a full examination, chest exam. It's not cheap, so I wouldn't chance it. And I don't think at this time there's anything you can really do to speed things along, especially if you're in Canada, you have a work permit. They're not going to be prioritizing your permanent residence. They're kind of using their resources to solve some of the critical issues that are impacting others that may need it more.
Okay, thank you. And Carla wants to know, do worker visa applicants need biometrics? Again,
if it's in Canada or outside, so that depends.
Okay.
There's a great tool online, Do I Need My Biometrics? And you can just click through and find out. I don't know if it's updated with the new requirements, but if you're in Canada and applying, it's not a requirement for temporary.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And we have a question from YouTube, from Frank. He's watching us on YouTube, and he says the instance of IRCC accommodating inland spousal applications for PR, is there a time limit for now? Because it reverts, because it reverts, what are the available Ontario nomination program routes in this period? I guess those are two questions from him. Yeah, let's just do the first one. So they say, is there a time limit for now?
Before it reverts.
Yeah.
I say inland. I'm not sure I understand, but they are processing inland spousal applications. So what that means is there's a couple either married or common law, they're both living together in Canada, submitting a sponsorship application. You can still submit those. They are processing them. They're being approved despite COVID. So there isn't really any accommodation there other than the landing process of no longer having to go for an interview. I'm not quite sure what the time limit before it reverts means. Yeah, but then what are the available ONP routes in this period?
Okay, so PNP, what are the available PNP routes? He corrected that. Yeah.
Okay, so like the main pathways for economic immigration to Canada, it's through that express entry, which I mentioned earlier, which is the federal, and then the other way is through the individual provinces. And then there's also like pilot programs, there's a northern and rural immigration pilot program for areas that have labor shortages and a lot of people aren't living there. So the PNP programs are each, the individual provinces have their own immigration pathways. So you first apply to those provinces, and then the province approves you and you get a nomination certificate. And then with that, you apply for permanent residence. So a question asking what is available, it is very specialized. Within one province, there could be like 15 different programs that are available. So almost all of them have ones that are like foreign worker with a job offer, and it could be high skilled, intermediate skilled. A lot of them have their own individual trade programs. Some of them have combinations with express entry and the PMB combined. Like BC has that, for example. So say you don't have enough points under the regular express entry, you can apply through BC first if you meet those requirements. So the PMPs are quite complicated, and I don't suggest it unless express entry wouldn't be available, or you are already working or have a job offer within one of those specific provinces. International students as well, they can benefit from these. The provinces usually have some pathway to PR for international students with job offers. So it's all case by case, province by province. So again, you can reach out if you want to have an assessment.
Okay. And so we have a question, quite a long one, from Shabnam, and they wrote their question in the chat, but I'll take it. And a reminder, if you want to write your question, please write that in the Q&A tab. Okay, so, but let me just take the question. Hi, thanks for this program. Me and my daughter, who is 17, are Canadian permanent residents and Australian citizens. During the 5 years of permanent residence, we have been 4 months. Last year, we came to Canada in November 2019 and enrolled my daughter in school and did some tasks like applying for health card, then returned to Australia in February to pack our stuff and return in Canada Easter holiday, but COVID happened.
I think I might just stop you there.
Yeah.
This is so we're speaking about just the general topics, and this is very specific question, but I think I know, I can speak generally about permanent residency cards and what she means about meeting the requirement or not, and having to, so due to COVID conditions, we're not able to return on time. So I think it does seem like they are outside of Canada now. So once you become a permanent resident, you get a permanent resident card, and then after 5 years it expires. And that doesn't necessarily mean you lose your status as a permanent resident. Just as if you had a passport and your passport expires, it doesn't mean you're no longer a citizen. However, there is a requirement, a residency requirement, that you live are physically present within Canada for 2 years out of a 5-year period. There are some exemptions if you're accompanying a family member as a Canadian citizen for work. There are some ways around it. There also, if there's some reason outside of your control that you were unable to return, there's a humanitarian and compassionate considerations. So you had to care for an ill family member, or something happened that required you to stay, then you still may be able to renew it without meeting the requirements. So I think maybe her question is asking about, can COVID, not being able to return because of COVID, be one of the reasons to justify not meeting the residency requirement? And I would say so. There's a test about how long you've been out and what the exact reasons are. And maybe you had planned to return at a certain time and then COVID prevented it. I think that is a great reason for not meeting the residency requirement. But again, COVID's just been happening since March. So if you already didn't meet the residency requirement and then you were trying to come to Canada, you may not have gotten in anyway, because they can make that determination upon entry at the border. So with most immigration things, it's all case by case. If it says, if you think you may not be eligible, there could be another way. It's not as black and white. So something specific like this, it might require a consultation to put together a plan.
Okay. So I think the same person asks, has the immigration considered any options or facilities for permanent residents whose PR has expired during this time, I guess?
So there's no PR doesn't expire. So that's not something. It's if you don't meet the permanent, even if you don't meet the residency requirements, a determination still has to be made by an officer before you would lose your permanent resident status. So that would occur once you try to apply for a new one or try to enter Canada. So again, with COVID, this is all new, and I think that it's difficult to say just because of COVID you didn't meet the requirements because not enough time has passed. If this has been going on for a couple of years, it may make more sense. But again, I can't really say. It's an individualized assessment. Yeah, and if you are a permanent resident, you should be able to return to Canada. And if you don't meet the residency requirements, then we would have to find a way why it's justified. I had a client actually that it was the same thing. He was entering Canada. He was a permanent resident, but he didn't meet the residency requirements. And so at the border, we prepared the whole package. Should the officer try to like question further, if your PR card's not expired, but you don't meet the residency requirements, you still may be able, or you do have a right to get in, but then the officer might do the assessment. So if your card expires, you're outside of Canada, you have to get a permanent resident travel document from the visa office or Canadian embassy before you can enter, and then they'll do the residency determination there. So if you don't meet it, then you could have it revoked.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing.
It's complicated.
Yeah,
Nothing's easy.
And like you said, I think this is a case,
Case by case.
specific. Yeah. So that person maybe may get to you just in case. They say thank you so much anyway.
I tried.
Yeah. So we're almost towards the end of the session, but I would like to understand from you, what should we expect, for example, in your own professional view? What does the immigration field look like post-COVID? I know we are not yet post-COVID, but we're hoping it's ending soon. And what should we expect it to look like?
Very different. Yeah, I'd like to stay positive and hopeful, but I think along with other changes in areas that are being impacted, a lot of it will depend on whether this is eradicated, whether there's a vaccine, because at the heart of it, it's public safety, the safety of Canadians and permanent residents, and not wanting to open the border as it was before. So there's still going to be immigration. Canada needs to have immigration for many reasons. We are a large country with a small population, but what that looks like and how they determine who can enter and who cannot is still going to be quite restricted. So as time goes by, more accommodations will be made, more announcements. I know there's still a lot of people that are stuck in limbo, and we haven't quite heard about.
Veronica, just hold on. You're saying limbo, but for people who do not know kind of the immigration language, limbo might sound like new. So if you can kind of break it down for our attendees.
Yeah, limbo is just sort of in between, in between right now, and they can't do anything. So they are just waiting for a change to happen. So the people that applied for permanent residence and they can't move forward until they do their biometrics, but the biometrics office are closed, those people are in limbo. And I have a client that applied for a work permit, but they are not processing the working holidays right now. So he's just waiting. So right now, that's unfortunately a lot of people are waiting for changes. So I'm here to help and figure out if those changes have taken place, or perhaps there's another way that you can come in to meet one of the exemptions. There's been a lot of creativity, and it's been interesting.
Yeah, and do you think, lastly, that certain things or the changes that have been made that are going to be like reverted to go back to what the original was, or?
I hope not, because a lot of them have been really helpful, like the thing I mentioned today about the translation. But I think it's inevitable that some will have to go back, especially with the postgrad work permit and working online or having online studies. I think that to continue that going forward when the schools are open and people are allowed to enter would not be within the interest of the schools and in within Canada. So something like that might be reverted, but it's hard to say. So I'm just happy that we are getting instructions now. We are moving forward. I just hope to see more of it in the coming months.
Okay, thank you so much, Veronica. Any parting shots? Anything you would like to say before we call it an evening?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, just if anybody wanted to get in touch, my firm is Roots Immigration Law. I'm based in Toronto, available through WhatsApp, Skype, Zoom, all different. Because of COVID, I've learned all different online resources. So yeah, you can, well, my email's not here, but the rootsimlaw.com. So it's just Veronica at rootsimlaw.com is the email. I can just type my name or Roots Immigration Law and find me online.
Okay, sorry, I'm just still typing the email.
Thanks.
Yeah, to all of you, Veronica's email is just there, just note the V is a small, a lowercase v. So thank you, Veronica, and thank you everybody who has joined us today for this session of Café New Canadians, again, your virtual event series where we bring you information of importance to newcomers in Canada. We are glad that you could join us. Don't you forget to subscribe to our newsletter. Café New Canadians is brought to you by New Canadians TV. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and all the other social media channels. We are also on Telegram. So be sure to follow us and know what is happening and all the information that we bring you. You can subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And we have information on settlement, employment, education, small businesses, immigration, and other related information. And if you're watching us on Zoom, please stay behind for just a few seconds and tell us how we are doing and tell us what topics you would want us to talk about. Tell us how we can improve this experience for you, because we are doing it for you and would like you to get the best out of it. My name is Gertrude Tumusime, and again, today we have been talking about the immigration process amid the new normal, and I've been speaking to Veronica Wilson. Thank you so much, Veronica, and thank you so much, everybody. You have yourselves a good night.